So much of what boards are about is actually what people do. The way boards have been traditionally studied is people look at annual reports, or they try and classify people, independent, not independent, etc. But at the end of the day, what governance is about are the decisions people are making, the behaviour of people. And we know that the behaviour of people can vary from what we think that they might do. So for us, I think it's really important to understand what are people actually doing in the boardroom, and what can we learn from that, and how can we make the governance of our corporations and organisations better. I suppose the early work that we started was in the traditional database design. And really, 30 years of research says I'm not sure that we're going to find anything else out from doing that kind of study. We started moving closer to the board in some of the research with doing survey designs and trying to get perceptions of what's going on through surveys and interviews. And what became fascinating about that was that the way that at least academics talk about what goes on in the board appears to be quite different to how board members think about it. And so because there is such a disparity, it led us to trying to get in closer to the action, and that's where we are now, looking at observation. And not only observation from just sitting there and watching what's going on, but also observation in the sense of trying to measure the behaviours. And so some of the more cutting edge, some would say bleeding edge part of what we're actually doing are using different techniques, different instruments, different measurement models to actually measure the behaviour associated with what directors are doing, particularly in the boardroom. So if you're interested in being involved in our research, we try and be as non-intrusive and as helpful as possible as part of the research program. Think of it like a normal board development exercise or evaluation that you might do. So the first thing we'd like to do is to meet with you and work out what you want to get out of the project. We understand it has to be mutually beneficial. So at that first meeting, we can discuss what exactly you'd like to understand about your board or what you'd like to get out of the process. At that meeting, we can also let you know in more detail what we actually do and any questions you might have. Really, there are three parts to the data collection that we use. The first is that we have an online survey that we like all directors to do to get some information about the directors, about your board, about your organisation. We can, of course, tailor questions around precisely what you'd like to know a bit more about, as well as some of the questions that we'd like answered as part of our research. The second thing that we do is we have an interview with all of the directors and key personnel. We'll agree that list with you, and we also agree the line of questioning that we use. Now, a fair bit of that interview is talking with your directors and key personnel about the issues of interest to you. But there's also a component where we ask questions that are important for our research. That part takes about probably 15-20 minutes out of the full interview, and the rest of the time we're talking about things you'd like to know. The third component is the board observation. You're going to see a bit more about that in a minute, about how we go about that observation. But in essence, we use these little babies. It's a device that can measure movement, voice, how much you're facing other people, those kind of things. More detail later in the video, but we just put that around someone's neck. You wear it a bit like a necklace, and that way we can measure what's going on in the room. We also like to be in the room at the same time. Now, we fully understand that there are parts of the meeting you might not want to have observed, And so in those points, we cut off all data collection and we'll leave the room. We'll be guided by you. You also should know we have full ethics approval for this. We can answer any questions around that, and importantly, from your perspective, you're in control of the data. So it means, you can decide whether it gets destroyed or not at any point in time. And I can go through that in more detail with you if you'd like. Once we've collected all the data, we go back to the questions that you had at the beginning, the things you'd like to know. We might also add in a couple of insights that we have from our research for you, and we'd have a meeting generally with the chair to say, look, here are the kinds of things we found. How about we come and present to the board and give you a potential couple of areas for development so that you can set out, hey, here's a couple of things we can change about how we work as a board to try and get things better.
Basically, we set up 2 or 3 cameras and ask each director to wear a sensor badge for the duration of the meeting. One of the team will remain in the room to observe the meeting and to ensure the equipment is working properly. We will help you put on the sensors, which simply clip around your neck and are adjusted to the right length. Then the meeting proceeds as normal. We have noticed that most people forget about the cameras and badges within the first few minutes. The cameras are positioned to be as unobtrusive as possible, but to capture everyone at the table. At the end of each item, we will ask you to fill out a very brief mini-survey about the item, and that's it.
So I suppose you're wondering, what do we get out of the process? Well, hopefully we can give you some insights about how you operate and a couple of tips for how you might make your governance and particularly your board operations a little more, streamlined or effective. Sometimes that can be a bit of tweaking. Sometimes there can be a couple of major insights that we can provide. So we do that mainly by giving you feedback through traditionally a document and a workshop. So there's a document outlining the data that we collect and the insights. That'll include the responses to the online survey, some stuff from the interviews and also the observation. You can see the kind of things that we got here. You can get understandings of who's talking in the meeting. You can get an understanding of how the energy levels are going at various times and at different segments of the meeting. And that can give us insight into how we might look at making the board operations more effective. So we look at all that data, share that data with you, and out of that we have a discussion with the chair about trying to isolate 4 or 5 key things to focus on. We then come to the board with those 4 or 5 things with some supporting data and a couple of ideas for people to discuss. And we try and have a discussion where the board decides, hey, this is something that we might think about doing differently, and you get an action plan so you actually get change. So at the end of the day, that's what we're about. How can we help you change what you do to make it even better, more effective, more efficient?